Hi there, today's card tutorial was inspired by a Stampotique challenge which was black and white with a hint of colour, and I hope that you agree that this matches that brief, and I had great fun creating it. You may or may not remember that I won a stamp from the lovely Magda, who designed this little stamp that I've used on my card, which is called Ignis, and I just knew that I wanted to use it again when the little idea popped into my head to make this card. Now, the reason I'm showing the tutorial is because it does show you something which is quite neat, and that is how to mask and stamp if you're a newbie, and that creates that crowd scene on the back of the card. And also it's an easel card, so again something else that you might not have tried before and you might like to have a look at. This could easily be accomplished with other stamps. I'm going to be using black archival ink, and I've got my 3 pops of colour. I'm going to be using this little Ignis stamp, but you could equally use a character stamp of your own and just follow the same idea and layout for the card. So I'm starting with a piece of card that measures 5 3/4 inches by 11.5 inches, and if I turn it the right way, I'm going to show you how to score it. So with it in the landscape position, I'm going to make the easel card base. All the measurements for this card will be listed over on my blog, and I'll leave a link at the end of this video. So first of all, you're going to score at 5 3/4 inches, which divides your card in half, and then you're going to score again, dividing. Why have I paused? Oh, there I am, moving again. I know why I paused. I was having a little bit of a moment trying to work out what half of 5 3/4 was. It is 2 7/8 of an inch. So you're going to score at 5 3/4 and at 2 7/8 of an inch from the left hand edge of the card. So this card fold is quite a nice one to learn how to do if you've not tried it before. So I'm folding my card in half to start with, and then on that second score line I'm folding it in half again, and this creates the little base that our card is going to sit on. That makes the image, the main image of our card, stand upright, a bit like an artist's easel, hence the name of the card fold. Just rounding the corners of the base piece of card, so just the 2 bottom corners. So you need a piece of black cardstock that measures 5 1/4 inches by 5 1/2, and the white that measures 5 1/8 by 5 3/8, and then one more piece that measures 5 3/4 inches square. So we'll be layering up the cardstock white, black and white, and I'm just going to round the top corners of each of those pieces of cardstock. And you might be noticing that the one that it's going to form the base, which is the 5 3/4 square, I've done both corners, but you'll find that I make a little mistake on this and correct this later on. And I just want the top corners of each of the 3 pieces of cardstock to be rounded and the bottom edge to be flat. These 3 pieces will eventually be layered up and attached to the easel card base like so. As promised, I'm going to show you this masking technique, and I'm going to be using it to create a crowd on my smallest piece of white cardstock, which is the piece that measures 5 1/8 by 5 3/8. Now you could feasibly be using any stamp to do this masking technique. I'm going to be creating a crowd, so I need a few masks of my Ignis stamp. So I've got this post-it note pad, and I'm making sure that I stamp Ignis so that she, or part of her, is across the sticky strip that's at the bottom of the post-it note. And the reason that you're going to do that is because you want that little sticky area to help hold the image in place when you're using it as a mask. Now you can use this technique to group together any number of stamps, but you will have to create a mask of the stamp that is going to be in the foreground of your picture. Now because I'm creating a crowd, I'm going to need more than one image covered up, as you will see as we go through this process. So my top tip is to pull off a couple of pages of your post-it note and then cut out more than one of your stamped images at a time. Now these masks you can reuse, so if you cut one out, it's always a good idea to perhaps keep it with your stamp and you could use it again, and it'll save you cutting out again another time when you might want to be using this masking technique with your stamp. Now this little stamp is quite easy to cut out, so it's not too crucial if I had to do it again, but some stamps are quite intricate, and when you've spent all that time cutting out your mask, it's quite nice to just keep hold of that just in case you need to use it again. So I'm also going to remove Ignis's hair because it doesn't really matter if that does overlap, but I do want to remove the pieces of white area that are in between Ignis's arms. So I'm going to take my craft knife and I'm going to carefully cut out the spaces formed by the arms of this little image. So as I said before, you could be using any kind of stamps to do this. You could be using little animals, for instance. You could be using a little dog or cat stamp, and any other character stamp to make this card, really. Because the premise is that all the little figures in black and white are the same, and then my colourful character that sits at the front of the easel is the one that is unique, who is daring to be different, and that's the message of the card. And you could make the same idea or design using other stamped images that you might have. Although I do recommend that you go over and buy this lovely little Ignis stamp from Magda, because it's really cute, and I just think she just looks like she needs a hug. Now, one of the other things that I'm going to do, because I know that I'm going to remove the message, the hugs and kisses that are inside Ignis's little placard, so I'm just going to create, again, making sure it's on the sticky strip, I'm just going to create a little mask for that inside section, which I'll trim up a little bit later on, and you'll see that. I'm cutting around the fingers for now, but I don't actually need the complete image, and you'll see that as we go through this tutorial. So once you've created your masks, you're ready to start stamping. Because I'm going to colour some of these images, I need to stamp in an archival ink, which I'm doing, and I'm placing my first stamp in the centre at the bottom of this card, and I'm going to build up the crowd from this point. So this stamp will look like it's right in the front of everybody, and then I'm going to put a little mask over her using that sticky strip that's at the where the placard is on the stamp, and that will hold it in place and allow me to stamp over it. Make sure you press down well. And I've got another little Ignis stamp, and then I'm going to repeat that on the other side. You can see that that main image is now to the foreground, and I'm going to start covering up the different little images of Ignis as I stamp further and further up the card, creating my little crowd of Ignis stamps. So now when I stamp over these two masks, you can see the piece that is masked by, oh, who put that coffee there? That was my lovely husband bringing me a cup of coffee. And now I'm creating the second row just by moving these little images around. I need to cover this one up, and then I can stamp that final one on this row. And you can see how my crowd is beginning to develop. And then it's just a case of moving your masks around, working out where you need to cover up the stamped images that have gone before, and gradually building all the way up your card, creating a crowd of little characters. And I've decided I'm going to fit in one more row at the top of this card. Now it all depends on what stamp you're using as to how many rows you're going to fit. I'm just checking here because I want a little bit of wording at the top of this card, and I think I can fit in one more row. So back with the mask and on with that final row of stamped images. Now you do need to make sure that you just press a little bit harder when you're doing this, just to make sure that you don't get any white area where you stamp over the paper because you've got a little bit of extra thickness where the paper is. So just a little bit extra pressure and you'll avoid getting a little white area around the stamped images. Now this is my second attempt, I have to confess, at colouring in with my black soot distress stains. Now if you have never used distress inks before, you may not be aware that you can use them as a watercolour. So you just need to squidge them onto a shiny surface. I'm using my craft mat, you could use a sheet of acrylic. And then I'm just adding a little bit of water to my brush and I'm going to be using it as a watercolour. Now the trick with this is to lay down a layer of shading or shadow and then to blend it out. Now because we're working with black, it's quite stark. So what I've tended to do is I've just laid down a layer of water first, and then I'm coming in with my ink. Then I'm going to clean off my brush, which I'm doing here, and then I'm going to come over that edge just to soften it and blend it out back into the white area. So I'm just trying to create a shaded area around the chin of each of my characters, as if they're kind of looking down, although their eyes are looking up, as if their heads are just bobbed forward and down. So that's where the shadow would be. And like I said, because I'm using black, I think it was a little bit trickier than it normally would be if you were using slightly lighter colours. So you might want to practice this a little bit before you begin. I practiced on a whole sheet. And the other thing that I'm going to be colouring in is the little arms and the body of Ignis, as well as just the outside frame of the little placard. And I'm going to be doing that for each of my stamps. So I'm going to take you through it once more in slow motion, a little bit closer, and then I'm going to fast forward through this little step of creating this card. So rinsing off my brush and starting with a clean brush, I'm just wetting the area I want to shade. Then I'm loading up with my distress ink, and then I'm running along that chin area of my stamped image. And once I'm happy with that, I'm washing off my brush again, just drying it slightly on a piece of kitchen roll and then running it along that top edge just to blend it out back into the white area of the face. And by the time I got to the end of my little crowd shading in this way, I did find that I perfected the technique a little bit, so it's definitely worth a practice. And then coming back in and really blending that area out with a clean brush. And there is the finished little image. So I hope you agree that they all look very similar. So apart from the wording, that's this area finished for now. Next we're working on the 5 3/4 inch square of white cardstock, and you can see this time I have only rounded the top 2 corners. I've chosen to use this crosshatch stamp from Hampton Arts. You could use any background stamp that you find that you could add little touches of colour to. I want to keep the main part of this stamp black and white, but I do want to add little pops of colour, and you'll see how I do that, and you'll be able to choose which kind of background stamp you might find in your little stash that's suitable for using for this method. So using the black archival ink again, because I want to add colour to this stamped image afterwards, I'm just going right around 3 edges of this card. I'm not too worried about the stamp overlapping because I think this stamp doesn't really matter, but I'm just keeping to that border because that's the only piece of the cardstock that's going to show. So once you've done that, you can mat and layer the 3 pieces of cardstock together, but I'm going to start by just running my ink pad around the edge of this cardstock, just very lightly, just to catch the very edge of the card, and also around the bottom edge of the main stamped image. And I'm going to be using glue to put my card together. So I'm just lining up that bottom edge and then adding my little black and white crowd. Now we're ready to use that same crosshatch stamp to cover the entire base of the card. So I'm just using a couple of post-its to mark on that scored line, and then I'm going to be using the same black archival ink and stamping this crosshatch stamp all over the base of the easel card. So sorry about the shaking of the camera. I'm being a little bit vigorous here with this stamp. I just want to make sure that I don't get it wrong and don't miss out any areas. It's quite a big stamp, so it's always a good idea to stand up and put plenty of pressure behind the stamp. And because my tripod sits on my desk, that's why I get a little bit of a wiggle. When you remove your post-it notes, you've got a lovely clean edge on the inside of your card. And then I'm just running that ink pad right around the outside edge. Now you may remember that I said I wanted to mask off the little message on Ignis's placard. Well, I've stamped my little image the wrong way around. I kind of want a mirror image because I'm going to use it actually to mask the stamp to stop the ink going where I don't want it to. So I'm just cutting this little mask so that the noughts and crosses or the hugs and kisses are masked off while I ink my stamp. Then I'm going to remove that little piece of paper and I'm going to stamp my little Ignis image. So you can see now she's got somewhere where I can actually write on that little placard. So you can use little pieces of paper like that on any of your stamps if you want to just remove a little bit of an area of a stamp. So just mask the area that you don't want, ink up your stamp, remove the paper, and then you can stamp your little image. So now for the little pop of colour, and again I'm using my Distress Inks as a watercolour, and I'm going to be using Peacock Feathers, Mustard Seed and Festive Berry to colour in my little image, just to give this little stamped image its own unique personality, and that's kind of the theme of this card. Now you may be wondering as I colour in this stamp, why do I put my Distress ink onto my craft mats? Why don't I just sort of rub my brush against the ink pad? Well, the reason is Distress inks have got a unique property that allows them to do many different things, and part of that is their chemical makeup. They've got a longer drying time which allows them to be blended. They're also water soluble, which allows you to create all sorts of textures by adding water once you've added the ink to a project. So you don't want to disturb that by adding a wet brush or any kind of spray of water onto your ink pad. So always put your little smudge of ink on something, on a non-porous surface, so you can use it as a paint palette, and you can do what I'm doing here, which is colouring in your stamped images with your Distress inks. Just wanted to define the little stripes that I've put onto Ignis's top, so I'm just coming in with a fine black pen just to emphasise those stripes. Now I want to colour some more strips of card with my Distress inks. This time I want a really vibrant pop of colour, so I'm just dragging my Distress inks directly over my cardstock. And I want to have one strip of each of the colours, which I'm colouring on both sides of the strips of paper. Don't forget to clean up in between. So I've done my red, my yellow, and this is the Peacock Feathers, which I'm colouring on both sides, ready to create some little flowers for my card. Use a little flower punch to do this, but I happen to have this little Spellbinders cherry blossom die, and it's got some really tiny flowers, so I use those little strips of card and I cut out the whole selection of little flowers ready to decorate my card. I'm going to use this little piece of foam to shape my flowers. You can see it's well used, well loved. It's just a little piece of foam, and I'm going to be putting my flowers onto it and then just pushing into the flower centres. And you can use either a barbecue skewer like I'm using here, or if you've got a fine ended ball tool, you could use that. So I start out with my barbecue skewer and then move on to the embossing tool. I'm going to be layering up some of these flowers to use on Ignis to make her a lovely flowery headband, and I'm going to be using the remainder of those flowers just to decorate the outside section, the crosshatch section of this card. So first of all, I would have cut out my Ignis stamp. Now I don't know why I chose to start sticking these on. I just couldn't wait to see what they look like, I think, but I definitely would cut out Ignis first, and you'll see why when I come to cut her out. You can see here that I'm just layering up the flowers. I'm using my barbecue skewer just to get the glue in the right place, and it just makes it a little bit easier than trying to use your fingers to manage these little tiny flowers. And then I'm layering them up to create a lovely headdress, which definitely makes this little Ignis unique. I wondered about putting a flower somewhere else, but I think that the little headdress is enough on its own. So I changed my mind about this, and then I decided to cut her out. So as I come around the image and get to the area where the flowers are, you can see this is where I come unstuck. Now you notice that one thing that I've done is left a little tab which is just slightly narrower than the little placard that Ignis is holding, and it's that little tab that I'm going to be using to attach her to the card. So make sure that you leave that. Looks a little bit like she's now sitting in a flower pot. And I'm just reattaching the flowers that I had to take off while I cut around the image. So if you do it the other way around, you won't have to do that. And I'm just adding a little couple of flower centres using a black pen. Attach the main image to the card, so you want to add glue to the easel card base, and then your topper needs to line up so that when it's closed it's directly on top of the easel card base. And the next thing that we need to make is something to make sure that this little easel remains upright. So you have to form some kind of topper, or stopper should I say, to make sure that this card sits upright once it's being displayed. So to make the stopper you need 2 pieces of cardstock, one that measures 5 3/4 inches by 1.5 inches, which is the black piece of cardstock, and one that measures 5 3/4 by 1.25, which is a piece of white cardstock. The white cardstock will be layered on top of the black, but I'm going to stamp it first with that same cross hatch stamp. So black archival ink, and then just stamp all the way across that 1.25 inch strip of white card. I'm going to use PVA glue to layer these two sections together, so I just want to put the white centrally on top of the black, and you want to tuck that little tab that you made on your coloured stamp underneath that white strip. And you just need to make sure while the glue is wet that your little Ignis stamp is in the right position, and then you can make sure that the two pieces are pressed down firmly together. I'm going to be using a strip of foam tape to just raise this little strip slightly from the base of the easel card. It's about 1 inch back from the front of the card, and you can see straight away that because that little strip is raised, it's going to keep that easel in the upright position. And here's where another little pop of colour comes into the card, and I'm just going to be adding little squares of colour, my 3 colours, my peacock feathers, mustard seed and the festive berries, just to add a little bit of interest on that cross hatch area. This did take a little while. It was all about being random about which little coloured squares you chose for each colour, and also about keeping your brush not too wet, because you want to make sure that you stay within those lines so that it looks as neat as possible. So I started with the peacock feathers, then I came in with the mustard seed, and the idea is that there's only little tiny pops of colour. It's you're not trying to colour in all these squares, because that defeats the object of keeping this card mainly black and white with a pop of colour. But I really like how this looks. It looks really modern, and I definitely think I might use this on another card because I like the effect of these little dots of colour in this crosshatch background. And then once you're happy with all those little squares of colour, it's time just to add a few of those tiny flowers to the actual border strips and the frame of your card. So again, I'm just adding a little pile of glue to my craft mat, and then I'm going to come and use my barbecue skewer to add the little dots of glue where I want them and push my little tiny flowers into position. So I just carried on adding the flowers in a random fashion. A couple of the flowers I did layer up, and then once I was happy with that, I was ready to move on to the final message of my card. I decided to use the phrase "dare to be different." I'm going to use these little tiny letter stamps, and I'm just stamping the individual words, so dare to be different. And then I've cut out each of the individual words. I'm being very neat and tidy, putting all my stamps back in the right place, and I'm going to put my words across this top strip of the card, but I just want to add another little tiny pop of colour, so I'm just mounting them onto a little bit more of those inked strips that I made earlier. So, and then I'm just cutting around them. I'm not trying to be too precise, I'm just creating little frames of colour around my, I can't really call it a quote, I suppose, just my little message that's going to be on this card, dare to be different. So I've decided to add little flower centres using my black pen, and then I'm going to add my wording. I was going to pop them up on foam pads, but I liked them better just straight onto the card with glue. So I'm just randomly placing the phrase across the top of the card. And the last little touch, I'm going to write I am unique on Ignis's little plaque. So there you have it, my Stampotique challenge, which is black and white with a touch of colour. I really had great fun doing this and loved how it came together in the end. I know that you can create this using other stamps, but I definitely recommend this gorgeous little stamp by Magda over at Stampotique if you're interested in going to purchase her for yourself. Don't forget to stay tuned for the links at the end of the video. One of them will take you back to my blog for the cutting guide and a few more details on the stamp that I used for this video, as well as a link to the challenge that I'm going to be taking part in, because it really is a fun one and you might want to check it out for yourself. So today we've explored masking and we've learned how to make an easel card. So I hope you found something useful in today's tutorial and that you've enjoyed this fun design. I've enjoyed making it and I enjoy your company, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you like my videos, and of course don't forget to press share or like or the thumbs up, etc. if you want to share this card tutorial with your friends. Until next time, thank you for watching. So firstly, I'm sharing a link back to my blog for the cutting guide and the details of this stamp, and then the second link that I'm sharing is for this little home decor project, again featuring that gorgeous stamp. Don't you just want to give her a hug? Then I'm going to share a link to this card, and this time you're going to take your easel card and you're going to turn it into a double easel card, and you can use the scraps of pattern papers that you have in your collection to do this. And then if you want to take it one step further, why not pop along to my Etsy shop to purchase the workshop that will show you how to make this gorgeous tag and easel card. So it's just another variation on an easel card. All the templates come with it, as well as full video and photographic instructions. So I look forward to crafting with you soon.